Today in art you're making your big mouths, and you will need your bucket of tools and your slip. You will also probably need your needle tool, and you'll need your ball of clay. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your ball of clay, and this is really a lot of clay to work with, and so even though it's the same size that we worked with for Clay Wars, and you're going to break off a piece and just set that aside because you'll use that for your other stuff. And you're going to make it, yesterday we practiced making it into as smooth a sphere as possible. It doesn't necessarily have to be smooth, but you do want it close to a pretty round shape. So even if it has some fingerprint marks, we can actually fix that later. So after you make it into a ball, then you're going to take it and you're going to push your thumb into it. And the video with the guy doing the clay demonstrations that we looked at also did it the same way. And our thumb stays on the inside and our fingers are on the outside. And you're going to pinch and turn and pinch and turn. And now that that's big enough to get both thumbs in, now I'm going to pinch and turn and spin it. And I'm not pulling the clay, I'm just pinching it. And that's opening it up. And you can see that it's starting to crack around the edges, and that's not a huge deal yet. When we discussed clay, we talked about how we wanted clay to be no thinner or thicker than our pinky width. And so this is about right for this project. And now I have a pinch pot. Okay. Some of you are going to choose to place it down. Some of you are going to choose to place it on its side like that so it's open. But either way, some of you are wondering what this is. We're going to use this and we're going to use it to smooth. And it's a really good smoothing tool because we can sit here and try to blend this all we want, but this gives us kind of a nice hard edge. And we're going to scrape, and you can actually put the extra right onto your board, and we'll clean that off later. And so you're smoothing out your project with this, and it kind of gets rid of some of our fingerprints and stuff. Now I have it pretty well smoothed out, but before I move any further, I'm going to scrape that off there before it gets dried on there and gets too hard, because I can still use this clay. So I'm actually going to mix it up with my other clay that I have sitting there. So it's pretty smooth. You can take your fingers and just kind of smooth out any extra spots. Any cracking that you have right now will only get worse if you don't take care of it now. So I'm going to smooth it out. Before you move on now, you need to decide how it's going to sit. And most of you drew a picture. So if it sits like this, you should take your needle tool and write your name on the inside. If it sits like this, you should decide which is your top and which is your bottom and carve your initials into it right now, like that. So I'm going to have mine sit like this, actually, on its side like that. And I'm going to use this extra clay. And you can make eyes for it. But I can't just stick them on. We talked about when we slip and score pieces on, we don't want them to just hook together like this because as they dry, they'll pull apart. We want to score them so they lock together. And so you can either score with your needle tool, which works good on small parts, but because this is a little bit bigger, we're going to score with a fork. And so you're going to score both parts. And you're basically roughing up both parts so they join. And then in your tools, you should also have a couple paint brushes that we use for slip. And the slip is just really wet clay. And you're just going to paint just a little bit on both parts, just a little bit. We don't use slip for repairing or anything right now. We're just using it to attach. And so I've scored it, I've slipped it, and I'm going to smush this on there and kind of wiggle it back and forth. And while that looks okay, the other thing that I like to do is I like to take these modeling tools, whether they're wooden or plastic, and really make sure that it gets smoothed on there and joined on there tightly. That way it won't come off. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and then I'm also going to run my fingers around it to make sure that I didn't leave any score marks that show up. So if I did eyeballs like that, and I slipped and scored all of them on, He still kind of looks a little dead in the eyes, meaning he kind of has that look on his face. It makes him come alive if you take the needle tool and you do this to it. Now this still isn't quite enough detail, and so you will take the time, and I'm not going to make you sit and watch me do this, but you will take the time to slip and score your teeth on, and maybe you have a tongue that comes out. Just remember that if you get too thin, like if I mash this way down and have it really thin like that, that's going to be really fragile when it dries. So if I slip and score that on and it sits like that and it gets bumped even a little like that, it's probably going to break off. So you need to make sure that those pieces of clay still, even though they're meant to be thinner pieces like a tongue or something, we still want to give them some weight to them and slip and score them on a little bit thicker. So you'll take the time to do all of that, and you'll slip and score all those pieces on. You can also add, some of you had feet and tails, same thing with tails. You don't want to roll out a coil and make it this tiny skinny little coil and have it stick out like that. When you think you're done, it's always good to put it in the tub for a day. That way you can come and revisit it the next day and decide if you're really done. Because once you start to let this dry out, you can't change your mind. Any cracking before you decide that you're officially done needs to be smoothed out, remember, like I said earlier, or it will only get worse. So you'll smooth out, and I actually could go back in and do what I did to the first one and smooth that out all the way around. And then you let it dry out, and then we glaze them after they've been fired.